Would you like to learn how to make these delicious, scrumptious Ukrainian cabbage buns stuffed with bacon and sauerkraut and onions? If so, stay tuned for the next episode of Hilltop Stovetop. Hello and welcome back to Hilltop Stovetop, the show where we're teaching you how to make great meals in an ordinary kitchen. Today we're doing a little bit more ethnic cooking and making Pyrizhky, which are little buns stuffed with sauerkraut. Most of them are going to be stuffed with sauerkraut and bacon. I am going to do some with just sauerkraut and onion because there'll be a few vegetarian people who'll be interested. But this is a traditional Ukrainian food, and it is one of those things. I remember the first time I tried one, I said, I've got to learn how to make this because they are so delicious and addictive. And I finally found a recipe in an old church cookbook, and I made them several times, and then I lost the recipe. And so I hadn't made them in years until Christina asked me if I would do a video on how to make them. So I went searching, and now that there's the internet, you can find recipes for just about everything. So we now have the right recipe. So we're going to start mixing today. We're going to use a lot of the techniques that we learned when we were making Grandma's buns. So that's a previous video from about a month or so ago. And that's what's going to teach us how to do the dough. So I've already got our yeast started. So those of you who saw that video know that you'd mix your yeast with a little bit of warm water and a little bit of sugar so that the yeast has something to grow with. And we want to make sure that that has at least doubled in volume before we put it in the dough. But we'll start with the rest of the things first. This is a little bit different dough because it's not nearly as sweet as Grandma's buns, but it's still delicious. So we're going to start off, we've got 4 cups of all-purpose flour here in the mixer. And we're going to add about a teaspoon of salt to that. And then we're going to mix together our other liquid ingredients. So here I've got 3 eggs that I've beaten up a little bit. I've got half a cup of oil. So I'll mix that in. And I have 1 cup of sour cream. So we'll mix those together. Now it does say to make a little bit of a well in the middle. Of course, this is assuming I'm going to be mixing this by hand. And this is a soft enough dough. It's not that difficult to mix by hand. But we'll take all of those liquid ingredients and just pour that right into the middle. And we'll also put the 1 cup of sour cream. And the sour cream dough, those of you who saw the video on sour cream pastry, which was the Finnish meatloaf, the sour cream dough is a very nice touch when you've got a savory kind of a filling. Now I have seen recipes for this same sort of thing where instead of the bacon and sauerkraut, it's either leftover beef and sauerkraut. I've even seen one where it's a cottage cheese sort of filling, almost like a pierogi. The difference between a pierogi and this is that this is a yeast dough, so it's going to rise up quite a bit. Okay, so we're going to take this and mix that together for a bit. Okay, now this dough is still very stiff and there's not all of the flours incorporated, but that's because we don't have all of the liquid in there. So when I look at my yeast here, it is starting to grow. So I think we're okay to put that in. And that last, like, it's a half a cup of liquid, so that makes quite a difference in the consistency of your dough. Now that I've got this all together, I think we're a little bit too moist, because this is something that we're going to have to roll it out. So I'm going to take a little bit more flour and add that to the mix. And like I said in our last video, where I'm trying to teach people how to be, just learn the techniques. That makes a big difference with just knowing what it's supposed to look like. So let's mix that up. Okay. That's a little better. Now, I think what I'm going to do here is I'm going to dump it out onto the board, and I'm going to hand knead it for just a little bit till we know we've got a nice consistency, and then we'll leave this to rest in an oiled bowl so it doesn't get all dried out, and we'll be back in a few minutes to show you what that looks like. All right, so we've dumped it out onto our board. I had a little bit of flour in underneath it, and I sprinkled a bit more on top. We want it so that it's not sticky when we work with it, but we still want it to be really soft, because ultimately we do want to be able to roll this out almost like a cookie dough. So I'm just going to keep incorporating here until so my fingers don't stick to it when I do that roll. That's the key here. So we're getting pretty close. I'll get the rest of this flour out of the way so I'm not making it more sticky. And I'll just finish this up. Okay, so a nice soft dough. So now I'm going to take this bowl that has a little bit of olive oil in the bottom, put that in, and then I'm going to flip it over so we've got oil all over the surface of this. And by doing that, as it's rising, it's not going to dry out. And then I'm going to take a clean towel and just cover that and set it aside for about an hour to double in volume. So while that's doing that, we're going to start working on the filling for this. And the filling is onions and sauerkraut and bacon. So what I have here is a pound of bacon, which I put through the food processor, so it's really finely chopped. If you don't have a food processor, that's okay. Just make sure it's really finely chopped, because this is going to be the filling inside that bun. And if the pieces are too big, it's going to be hard to make a smooth surface without having bits of filling stick out. And the second part that we're going to do is the sauerkraut and onions. So I have here, this is a medium to large onion's worth, but you see I chopped it up, but it's still fairly big pieces. So I am going to put that through the food processor. And I also have sauerkraut. So, got a little dribbly sauerkraut. This is a 500 milliliter container. The recipe calls for a whole liter. So the very first thing we're going to do is to drain this. So you can hear just how much liquid there was in that. And the other thing that I like to do when I do something with sauerkraut is I do just give it a little bit of a rinse. And that tones down the flavor. I mean, there'd be a lot of people that would be just cursing the fact that I'm doing that. And if you really like it strong, you don't have to. But I prefer to just give it a little bit of a rinse so it's not quite so vinegary. And then I'm going to put that through the food processor. So when you look at your, and I'm just going to move this over under the camera here. When you look at your sauerkraut, if you see pieces that are fairly long like that, that's an indication that when you put it inside the bun, it's not going to want to stay in place very well. So I'm just going to give this a little spin through the food processor. Again, if you don't have one of these things, don't worry about it. I'm going to put about half of the onions. Oh, no, I'm not going to put half the, well, I'm going to put the onions in with that. Yes, I am. And we're going to give this a little bit of a swoosh. Now that was about half of the onions with that. And I'm going to take this and put this in a separate pan, some of the sauerkraut and the onions, and this will be for the ones that I'm doing that are going to be vegetarian. So we'll put that onto simmer, and we'll start putting this into another bowl. And then we'll do the same with the second jar of sauerkraut. Okay, now I'm just going to set that to drain for a little bit while I chop up the rest of these onions. Always glad I do these ahead of time because otherwise I'm weeping on the air here. These onions I'm going to put in with this bacon. Okay. Now, we're going to continue to cook this bacon and onion mixture until the bacon is almost cooked. And then when that's almost cooked, then we can add the rest of the sauerkraut and the salt and pepper. And you'll notice it is quite liquidy now, so that a lot of that liquid will evaporate as part of our cooking process. So we'll see you in a few minutes when this is done. All right, so our bacon is almost completely cooked and the onions along with it. All a nice even consistency there. And what we're going to do now, you notice I'm leaving the fat in that, and that's part of the moisture that's going to be inside these buns. And then I'm going to add the rest of the chopped up sauerkraut in with that. And we're going to add a bit of salt, especially because I did rinse that sauerkraut to get rid of the vinegary, but that also gets rid of the saltiness on it. And then I'm going to add probably maybe almost 2 teaspoons of pepper to that. And I'm just going to mix that up, and you'll see how the fat seems to kind of absorb in with the sauerkraut. And that becomes the filling for the regular buns. And then on the other side here, we have the vegetarian version, which is just the sauerkraut and onions. I'm going to add a little bit of pepper to that and a bit of salt. And while the cameras were off there, I also added about 3 tablespoons of olive oil to that. and just to moisten it up a little bit. Again, the fat is a good part of the baking process that we're going through here. So that looks like everything is ready from a filling perspective. The only thing is that our dough isn't quite ready. So we're going to turn those off because we want them to be cool enough that when we go to fill the buns, we can handle them with our hands. So we'll let those cool. It'll probably be another half hour to 45 minutes before the dough is ready, and we'll see you then. All right, so we're actually about 45 minutes in. Our dough has doubled in volume. And one thing that I should have mentioned, when I first mixed this up, the dough felt a little bit cool. And as you remember from our previous videos where we made different yeast type products, temperature is important when you're dealing with yeast. And this dough was kind of cold because both the eggs and the sour cream that we'd added to it were kind of cold. So what I did was I took this dough and I actually I balanced the bowl in a hot water bath to give it a little bit of warmth. And that really moved the rising of the dough along quite a ways. So we're about double in volume. We're just going to give it a quick little knead. Again, this is still a very soft dough. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to cut it into a little bit smaller pieces because we're going to roll this out. And unless I want to take up the entire counter, that will be a little bit much. So I'll start with about 1/3 of this. And we're just going to use a little bit more flour. Again, we want it to be so that it's not sticky. Okay, so we've added a little bit of flour so that this isn't too sticky. And we're going to roll this out. It's actually quite easy to roll because it's so nice and soft. And we want it to be about 1/4 of an inch thick. There we go. And now I've got a cookie cutter. This is I think it's about a 3-inch cookie cutter. Some recipes call for it to be a little bit bigger than that, but I prefer these buns to be just a nice little mouthful. And we're going to cut them out just as if it was cookies almost. And you'll notice how as soon as we cut it, it wants to spring back a little bit, but that's okay. We'll spread it out. And then we're going to take a spoonful of the filling, just about a tablespoon or so, and pinch the edges in around on that. So we're going to pull 2 sides together and the other side together and the other side together. And you want to have it so that there isn't any filling sticking out the edges. Just give it a little twist as if it was a purse and flip it over. And there you have your first little bun. And we're going to keep doing that. The only thing that I'm going to do different, there's ones that are the vegetarian ones. I'll make sure that I set them aside on the cookie sheet so that we know which ones are which at the end. And when I get to the cookie sheets being full, we'll come back on and you can see how the process is. I'll just do one more. I'll do one more here so you can see it on the close-up. Okay. By having the circles like that, it's easy to spread out the edges of this, almost like a little bit of a miniature pizza. Okay. There, all the edges together. Give it a little twist and tuck that in on the bottom. Okay, so we've got the first tray done, and you'll notice that this is the one with the bacon filling, not the vegetarian. So we've marked the edge of the paper with a little B, so we know which ones are which. The other thing is you'll notice that there's some that are different sizes, and that's because the second batch that I rolled out was rolled a little thicker, which meant that the filling stretched, or the outer coating stretched a little further, and we could put a little bit more filling in. We'll try to be a little bit more consistent with the next round, but this is our first batch. We're going to cover this up with a towel and let it rest for about another half an hour. The filling, of course, won't change in size, but the outer edge will puff out a little bit before we pop it in the oven. So we've already started the oven preheating at 350, and we'll see you again in about half an hour when these are ready to pop into the oven. All right, so we're at about a half hour after having finished putting all these together. And we've got a nice variety of sizes for different people, but they have about doubled in size. These ones are all the bacon ones. But we also, and we set these over the hot water as well. Got another batch over here that are the vegetarian. And then we had a few extras that didn't fit on these pans that we put onto smaller pans. And these ones we're actually just going to try cooking in the air fryer after they've finished rising. But these ones were done first because they were in the warmest spot. So now we're going to pop these in the oven at 350 for 25 to 30 minutes until they're nice and golden brown. I'll check them at 25 minutes. If they're ready, take them out. If not, it'll be 30. And then we'll brush them with a little butter, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so we're just about at the 25-minute mark. Like I said, we want to go between 25 and 30 minutes, but I could smell them cooking, and it smelled about right. So we're almost ready to take these out of the oven and put the next batch in. And then we'll do the ones in the air fryer just a little separately, but I think the main thing is them in the oven. The other thing I should mention is when we were filling all of these things, the proportion of filling to dough was a little bit off. So we did have some leftover filling, which we've put away in the fridge, because all that is bacon, sauerkraut, and onion, remember. And essentially that's almost like a Reuben sandwich. If we add a little bit of cheese with it on some toast and warm it up, and it's going to make a great breakfast. So it's not going to go to waste. The other thing is that we could have made more dough or any number of things, but I think it'll be just as easy to heat that leftover up for breakfast, assuming that we're not going to have these buns, of course. So I'm going to get the other batch ready. So these will be ready to pop into the oven. And you can see how we've marked it, the S for sauerkraut, and we've got the B for bacon, so we know that these ones are all vegetarian. And the other ones are the ones with the bacon. And we'll move that there, so when we take these out of the oven, we're ready to go. Steaming up the glasses as we go. There we go. Awesome. So we'll pop the next batch in for 25 minutes. And then the last thing that we need to do here is to brush these with a little bit of butter. And I should have had my little brush here ready. So by brushing them with butter, that's going to soften up, because right now if you tap them, you can hear it's quite crunchy almost. So we're going to put this little bit of butter on them, and that will soften them up. And these are the kind of things that if you give them a little bit of time, you know, and even an hour or so, they'll actually get a little bit better as that filling merges with the dough, I'll say. So we'll let these cool enough that we can eat them, and then I'll show you what the insides are out like in just a few minutes. All right, so we've got them all working on cooling now. They are still quite hot. And I'm just going to cut one in half so you can see what they're like on the inside. Nice fluffy dough. I should show you the bottom, nicely browned, and no oozing out of fillings. But there's your filling on the inside with the bacon and the sauerkraut and the onions and this nice little cocoon of soft dough. And just a little crunchy on the outside, but soft on the inside, and they are so delicious. You're not going to believe these. So, there you go, folks. Pyrizhky, or sauerkraut buns, or cabbage buns, however you want to call them. They are awesome, delicious, and you're just going to be amazed by these. So try them soon. Thank you for joining us here at Hilltop Stovetop, where we're making great meals in an ordinary kitchen. Don't forget to like and leave something in the comments if there's something that you would like to learn how to make. And in the meantime, just keep watching, and we'll see you for the next episode.